Okay, it's one of the most enduring historical mysteries in British history. How did King William Rufus die? And what was the story behind his strange, mysterious death by being shot with an arrow in the New Forest in 1100? And, even now, the story is still so steeped in mystery that it's still taught in schools, and it's still leads to kids' books like this being produced. And there are all kinds of different theories as to why William Rufus died. And what I hope to do in this video is give you an idea about what I think the reason is for Rufus's mysterious death. Anyway, first of all, a bit about who William Rufus was. King William Rufus, or King William II, was the son of William the Conqueror, who took over as king after William the Conqueror died in 1087. So he's the second of the Norman kings, and he reigned from 1087 until his mysterious death in the New Forest on the 2nd of August 1100, the day after Lammas Day, day after the 1st of August. Now, William the Conqueror had 3 sons, and William Rufus wasn't the oldest of the sons. He had a brother called Robert Curthose. Curthose means short trousers, because he was probably quite a short guy like his mother Matilda. And then there was William Rufus. The nickname Rufus probably comes from the fact he may have had a very red complexion. He's believed now to have had probably fair hair and a red face, and so, hence Rufus for red, rather than meaning ginger hair or anything. And then there was a third brother. So there was Robert Curthose, William Rufus, and the third brother Henry. And when William the Conqueror died, he left Normandy to Robert Curthose, who he didn't really actually get on with William the Conqueror. So Curthose got Normandy, William Rufus got England, which was actually far wealthier than Normandy, even though he was the second son, and Henry was fobbed off with about £5,000 to £6,000 worth of money. So poor old Henry gets the least, the third brother, and the other 2 basically get Normandy and England. What then followed was a period of intermittent conflict between William Rufus and Robert Curthose over Normandy, and once Robert Curthose finally went on the crusade in 1095, he basically sells control of Normandy to Rufus, so he can get money to go on crusade. So by the time of his death, Rufus controls both Normandy and England. So he's a very powerful individual, very powerful king, and was in many ways a very successful king. He didn't add any real territory to his father's, but he certainly consolidated it, and he certainly was able to wrestle control of Normandy out of his older brother Robert. So to me that means he was a successful king. However, if you read the primary sources about William Rufus, most of which are monastic sources, written by chroniclers like Orderic Vitalis, William of Malmesbury, Eadmer of Canterbury, all of whom are monastic writers, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as well, which of course is written by English monks. They tend to not have a single hardly good word to say about William Rufus, and often this is also trotted out by historians, although not the best of them, but in textbooks and things you might still find some of the negative stuff. The reason he has such a negative reputation, and this might actually explain something to do with his mysterious death later, we'll see, but the reason he has such a negative reputation in the primary sources is because he had a very bad relationship with the church. And of course most of the writers are either monastic or they're people who are the sons of priests like Henry of Huntingdon. And so with these religious monastic writers, Rufus is inevitably going to have a bad press if he has very poor relations with the church. Why did he have very poor relations with the church? Well, for 2 major reasons. One, he had a string of male favourites and was probably predominantly gay, although we can't say that for certain, but it's highly likely. And at the time, of course, you can imagine what the clerics would think about somebody who has parties with male favourites and so on. So you've got what is basically homophobia involved in it, but also William Rufus never missed an opportunity to exploit the church for revenue, for money. He would often, when an archbishop or bishop died, leave the post vacant for years, and during that time the king was able to rake in the revenue from the land of the bishopric or the archbishop's land, whatever. And he was able to get the revenue for years until he appointed a new bishop or archbishop. So he did those sorts of things as well. And as a result, this reputation grew up for him being an irreligious man. And hence the bad press he gets from the sources. So, just because the sources say he was a poor king, it doesn't mean that he was. And once you actually look at the reality of it, how he was able to defend the kingdom, get Normandy off Robert, and so on, you can see that in fact he was actually, by medieval standards, quite a successful king. But anyway, now we come to why William Rufus then mysteriously died. Well, what's the basic story? Well, the basic story is that on the 2nd of August, 1100, which, as I said, was the day after Lammas Day. Lammas Day, the 1st of August, being a very old, pre-Christian, pagan in origin festival, which was certainly celebrated in Celtic times, under another name, of course, but it's basically a pagan festival. And on the 2nd of August, William Rufus was going on a hunting expedition in the New Forest. And normally those hunting expeditions set off pretty early in the morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, so they can get a full day's hunting. And it's not just the king and a few men, it's hundreds of people fanning out into the forest, firing arrows at the deer and the boar and so on. And with that many people firing arrows, away in the forest, it is plausible that a stray arrow accidentally hit the king. But, anyway, normally they set off early in the morning, about 7 o'clock, yet for some reason on this trip they don't set off till about 12 or afternoon, which is strangely late for a hunting expedition. Now, there's a number of possible reasons for that. It could be that happened because the king was recovering from his drinking the previous night. He was said to have been a heavy drinker, and maybe that explains why he's late. There are a number of stories that appear in some of the primary sources about mysterious omens and mysterious dreams portending death. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, for example, suggests that a few months before this, blood was seen bubbling up out of the ground, and this was taken as an omen that something really bad was going to happen in England, to do with death. And then, of course, a few months later the king dies. There have been various stories of not just Rufus himself, but various clerics having mysterious dreams predicting the death of the king. Whether that's just coincidence, whether it's embellishment by the chroniclers later, or whether it's in fact evidence of a clerical conspiracy, who knows. But there are these mysterious omens of death. So maybe Rufus was nervous, and that's why he's late going on the hunting expedition. But anyway, off they go on the hunting expedition. And the story that is usually trotted out in most of the sources, certainly Orderic Vitalis and William of Malmesbury say this, two of the most prominent chroniclers, although they disagree on some of the nitty-gritty detail. But the basic story is that Rufus was accidentally shot with an arrow by one of his companions, a man called Walter Tyrrell, who supposedly fired the arrow at a stag and it either missed the stag or glanced off the back of the stag and accidentally hit the king. Walter Tyrrell then immediately runs off and ends up in France. He gets out of it completely because he's killed the king, and the people with Rufus panic because with the king dead they think there's just going to be anarchy in England. So they all rush off back to their estates and leave the king's corpse lying there in the New Forest for either servants or local peasants to find and cart off to Winchester on the back of a cart. Meanwhile, Henry, Rufus's younger brother, who was there in the New Forest, immediately goes to Winchester and leaves his brother lying dead so he can get control of the royal treasury and then rush to London and make himself king in Rufus's place. Very convenient. But anyway, the story in most of the sources is that it was either a complete accident by Walter Tyrrell firing the arrow and missing the stag, or it was God's will that Rufus died for being such a wicked king. That's what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says. But of course, it would say that, wouldn't it? It's written by a monk and a monastic writer who hates this man because of his attitude to the church and his sexuality. So many of these chroniclers probably saw no need to look for a conspiracy because they just believe it's God's will that such a wicked man dies. But to me, it's far too coincidental that William Rufus died in this way. Why is it so coincidental? Well, his older brother, Robert Curthose, who had taken part in the capture of Jerusalem on the Crusades, was on his way back to England at the time of Rufus's death, or on his way back to Normandy, I should say, at the time of Rufus's death, which of course Rufus controls. And so there may well have been brewing a conflict over Normandy. Now obviously Robert is not really in a position to organise Rufus's assassination when he's on the way back. But think about Henry's motivations. Henry wants to be king of England. He's probably highly jealous of both his older brothers. He only got money, remember, from his father. And he very much wants to be king of England. If he waits until Robert gets back, then he would have to take on two brothers if he wants to get control of England and Normandy and run the cross-channel kingdom. If, however, he can take out Rufus through assassination, get control of England, which is far wealthier than Normandy, he would then be in a position when Robert gets back and goes back to Normandy to fight Robert for Normandy, get Normandy off Robert, and Henry gets the lot. And unless he takes out William Rufus now, he will never have that opportunity easily again. And that's why many historians, but especially this guy here, Duncan Grinnell Milne, in this excellent old book, The Killing of William Rufus, believe that it was a conspiracy by Henry that led to Rufus's death. There are other theories. There's a new biography of William Rufus by Emma Mason, this one here, King Rufus. And Emma Mason believes it was a conspiracy, but not by Henry, but by the King of France, Philip, because Rufus was planning a military campaign in France, so the King of France decides to take Rufus out before this can take place. And evidence for this is that Rufus was apparently Walter Tyrrell was apparently well rewarded in France after he fled there, and Mason trots out evidence of that. Personally, I think it's a bit far-fetched that the King of France could have been plotting this all the way from France at the time, and Robert and Henry, who was there in the New Forest at the time of the death, is a much more plausible candidate for the conspiracy. The most bizarre theory of all is that Rufus killed himself as part of a pagan ritual sacrifice, as argued by a woman called Margaret Murray. I don't personally believe that, but William Rufus was rumoured to have held paganistic beliefs. But to me, the more bizarre theory doesn't really hold water. Anyway, thanks for listening.